In an Inuit village nestled against the ice floe lived two inseparable boys, Aluk, lively and curious, and Nunuk, calm and observant. Their days were punctuated by the sound of the sea, the cries of the gulls, and the crackling of the fire in the igloos. They spent hours exploring the surroundings, observing the animals, and listening to the stories of their elders. One evening, as the polar night enveloped the village in darkness, their grandfather, a seasoned hunter, called them near him. "I am going to tell you the story of the Great Bear," he began, his eyes shining with wisdom. And for hours he spoke to them of constellations, legends, and the power of nature. Aluk and Nunuk were fascinated. In the spring, when the ice floe began to melt, their father took them fishing. They learned to handle the harpoon, build a kayak, and read the signs of the sea. It was an exhilarating time, where every day brought new discoveries. One day, while exploring a distant island, they discovered a strange metallic object washed ashore. Intrigued, they approached and recognized it. It was a compass. They had never seen one in their lives. After examining it from all angles, they decided to bring it back to the village. The shaman, a man revered for his wisdom, was astonished to see this unknown object. He meditated for a long time before explaining that this object could help them navigate even in foggy weather. The villagers were skeptical, but Aluk and Nunuk were convinced. Thanks to the compass, they became the best navigators in the village. They explored unknown territories, discovered new animal species, and brought back precious resources for their community. Their courage and intelligence made them heroes. But their adventure did not stop there. One day, while they were out hunting, they were caught in a snowstorm. They became lost and thought their last hour had come. But thanks to their knowledge of nature and the compass, they managed to find their way back. Aluk and Nunuk had become men, respected and admired by all. And so, the two young boys, sons of the ice floe, lived many adventures, always guided by their courage, their curiosity, and their love for their people. Guided by an ancient legend, Aluk and Nunuk decided to explore a glittering cave that was said to house an invaluable treasure. Armed with their harpoons and seal oil lamps, they ventured into the depths of the earth. The cave walls were lined with crystals that sparkled like thousands of stars. The air was damp and cool, and the silence was only broken by the dripping of water. At the end of a long tunnel, they discovered an immense chamber. In the center of the room, on an ice pedestal, rested a strange object, a crystal globe filled with a soft, shifting light. According to legend, this globe contained the secrets of nature. It could predict the weather, heal the sick, and even communicate with spirits. Aluk and Nunuk were mesmerized. They spent hours observing the globe, touching it, and making it spin. But their joy was short-lived. Suddenly, a dull rumble was heard. The earth trembled, and the cave walls began to crack. An avalanche of ice broke away from the ceiling and blocked the entrance. They were trapped. Panicked, they searched for a solution. It was then that Aluk remembered the stories their grandfather had told them. He concentrated and raised his hands toward the globe. An intense light burst from the crystal and illuminated the entire cave. The cracks closed up, and the ice avalanche dissipated. They were saved. Upon leaving the cave, Aluk and Nunuk decided to keep the secret of the crystal globe. They knew this object was too powerful to fall into the wrong hands. They hid it in a safe place and promised never to reveal it. An unprecedented snowstorm descended upon the village. The winds howled, and the snowflakes fell in thick curtains, obscuring the sky. Even the elders had never seen such a fury of nature. Days blurred into nights, and daylight was a pale glimmer through the thick clouds. Isolated in their village, the Inuit quickly ran out of food. Hunting was impossible, the sea was frozen solid, and food reserves began to dwindle. Despair started to creep into their hearts. Polar bears, also starving, approached the village. Usually afraid of humans, they now didn't hesitate to attack. Within a few days, 3 villagers had already lost their lives. Fear crept into the hearts of the inhabitants, and tensions rose. The weakest were accused of wastefulness, and the strongest began to quarrel over the last rations. Aluk and Nunuk, drawing on their experience and courage, decided to act. They gathered the young people of the village and proposed a plan. They would explore an ancient cache hidden in the mountains where their ancestors had stored food in anticipation of hard times. Their journey was long and grueling. The storm raged, and the cold was biting. But thanks to their determination and knowledge of the terrain, upon returning to the village, they were hailed as heroes. Thanks to their courage and ingenuity, they had saved their people from famine. The discovery of the cache restored harmony within the community. Hardly had relief flooded the village when dark news arrived. Neighboring tribes, also starved by the storm that had ravaged the entire region, got wind of the food cache. Drawn by the promise of abundance, they headed toward the village, armed to the teeth. The news plunged the village into panic. The inhabitants, who had finally found a little hope, found themselves threatened again. Aluk and Nunuk, aware of the gravity of the situation, decided to defend their village. They gathered the able-bodied men and distributed weapons. One dark night, the scouts spotted the silhouettes of the enemy warriors approaching. The village prepared for the confrontation. Women and children took refuge in the sturdiest igloos, while the men positioned themselves at strategic points. The battle was long and fierce. Arrows whistled through the air, harpoons plunged into flesh, and war cries echoed in the night. Aluk and Nunuk fought with desperate bravery, protecting their village and their loved ones. The battle raged, a veritable white hell. The ground was strewn with bodies, blood staining the snow. Cries of pain and rage mingled with the howling wind. The elderly, the women, the children, all were trapped in this murderous madness. As the two sides exhausted themselves in this fratricidal struggle, the first rays of the sun pierced the clouds that began to dissipate. The storm, which had been their common enemy, seemed to grant them a reprieve. The daylight, soft and soothing, bathed the battlefield, revealing the horror of what they had done. The combatants, exhausted and bloodied, froze for an instant, their gaze lost in the distance. The screams gradually died down, giving way to a heavy, oppressive silence. It was then that a piercing cry crossed the air, that of a wounded child calling for his mother. This cry, simple and desperate, resonated in the hearts of all the combatants. They remembered their own families, their children, their parents. The hatred that animated them began to fade, giving way to compassion and fear. Slowly, the combatants turned toward each other, their eyes meeting. They saw in the eyes of their adversaries not enemies, but men like themselves, fathers, sons, brothers. It was then that the chiefs of the two tribes, exhausted by the violence, decided to put an end to the carnage. They met in the middle of the battlefield, under the watchful eyes of the combatants and the villagers, and swore to live in peace. The rising sun illuminated a landscape marked by the violence of the clashes. The chiefs of the two tribes, standing amidst the ruins, looked at each other with respect. They had understood that hatred would lead them nowhere, and that unity was their only chance of survival. A plan then took shape. They would combine their forces to hunt and fish, thus replenishing their food reserves. The most experienced hunters from both tribes would go in search of seals and walruses, while the fishermen would venture onto the ice floe to catch fish. The women and children, for their part, would be responsible for preparing the food and caring for the wounded. Together, they built large nets and sophisticated traps. The men went to sea, braving the elements, while the women remained in the village, watching over the children and the wounded. Days passed, marked by hard work and mutual aid. Reserves gradually rebuilt, and hope was reborn in their hearts. Strengthened by their experience, the two tribes decided to unite to form a single village. They chose a strategic location, sheltered from the prevailing winds, and began to build new igloos. Old conflicts were forgotten, replaced by a feeling of solidarity and fraternity. The children of both tribes played together, learning to know and respect each other. The elders passed on their knowledge to the younger ones, teaching them hunting, fishing, and survival techniques. The women worked together, sharing their skills and recipes. The new village prospered. The inhabitants lived in harmony with nature, respecting the cycles and rhythms of the Arctic. They had learned from their mistakes and now knew that strength lay in unity and cooperation. Aluk, seriously wounded by a harpoon, was treated with medicinal plants from the tribe. Although the wound was serious, it had been treated in time, and he was no longer in danger. However, the thought of not being able to participate in the hunt plunged him into deep sadness. He felt useless, a burden to his community. Meanwhile, Nunuk, who returned from the fight with a huge bison, dragged with difficulty across the snow with the help of 2 other hunting companions, was acclaimed as a hero. The women helped him transport the beast to the village where it was butchered and shared among everyone. Nunuk, despite the scratches adorning his face, radiated pride. He had proven his worth and his loyalty to his people. But the joy of victory was tempered by the sadness of Aluk's injury. The other children of the village surrounded him, telling him about their friend's exploits and the adventures of the hunt. The boy listened enviously, bitterly regretting not having been able to participate in this adventure. One evening, as the village fell asleep, the young Aluk called his friend Nunuk. He asked him to recount in detail every moment of the hunt. Nunuk, touched by his friend's request, gladly accepted. For hours, he described the landscapes, the sensations, and the dangers they had faced. Aluk, thanks to these stories, felt involved in the life of the village again. He realized that even bedridden, he could contribute to the well-being of his community. He decided to use his knowledge to teach the younger ones survival and hunting techniques. Thus, even if he could not physically participate in the expeditions, he was transmitting his knowledge and ensuring the continuity of their culture. The short period of peace and rebuilding was quickly interrupted by the announcement of a new winter, more severe than the previous ones. The elders, guardians of their people's memory, predicted violent storms, thick ice, and a food shortage. Fear once again crept into the hearts of the village inhabitants. The chiefs of all the neighboring tribes then gathered. They remembered the hardships they had gone through together and the strength they had found in union. They decided not to repeat the mistakes of the past and to face this new threat united. A great council was organized. The villagers, concerned about the future of their children, decided to pool their resources and knowledge. They reinforced their igloos, accumulated firewood, and prepared provisions for the long months ahead. Hunters went in search of game, fishermen ventured onto the ice floe, and women made warm and durable clothing. Winter finally arrived, more rigorous than expected. Snowstorms swept the landscape, making travel difficult and dangerous. Hunting and fishing became real challenges. But the villagers, united and determined, did not give up. They took turns guarding the fire, ensuring it never went out. They told each other stories and legends to comfort themselves and maintain their morale. The children, despite the cold, played in the snow, building miniature igloos and carving figures in the ice. Aluk, despite his injury, participated in village life by recounting his dreams of adventure and encouraging the younger ones. His friend, the hunter, became his spokesperson, describing the landscapes he discovered during his expeditions. The wise men of the Inuit tribes, after long nights of meditation and contemplation of the stars, came to a unanimous conclusion. The devastating storm and the subsequent famine were signs of the gods' deep displeasure. They stated that the spirits of nature, offended by the conflicts and selfishness of men, had sent this ordeal to punish them. The inhabitants, filled with remorse, realized the mistake they had made by resorting to violence. They then decided to organize a great ceremony to appease the anger of the gods. For several days, the men and women busied themselves preparing the ceremony. They carved masks representing the spirits of nature, made offerings of food and fur, and composed songs to implore the gods' forgiveness. On the day of the ceremony, all the villagers gathered around a large fire. The shamans, dressed in their finest attire, chanted powerful songs that resonated into the night. They invoked the spirits of the sea, the earth, and the sky, asking them to forgive their mistakes and send them their blessing. During the ceremony, An aurora borealis illuminated the sky with a multitude of colors. The inhabitants saw it as a sign of the gods' benevolence. They were convinced that their prayers had been answered. After the ceremony, the villagers decided to dedicate themselves to rebuilding their community. They strengthened their bonds, shared their knowledge, and worked together to face the challenges of winter. The winter was long and harsh, but the villagers went through it united and supportive. They had learned from their mistakes and were now determined to live in harmony with nature and the spirits.